The cold glow of the phone screen burned into my tear-stung eyes as I stared at the bank notification popping up one after another, my fingers trembling so violently that my phone nearly slipped out of my numb grasp. I'm Lila Bennett, 18 years old, trapped in the shattered wreckage of a broken family that had stopped being warm long before my parents' official divorce 3 years ago. My childhood was never filled with laughter, family dinners, or parental companionship. It was stitched together with endless quarrels, cold silences, my father's crushed dignity, and my mother's growing, unbridled hatred for the man who had once loved her with everything he had. 3 years ago, my mother's extramarital affair completely shattered our family. She abandoned my father's sincere, plain, lifelong devotion for fleeting passion and empty romantic excitement, chose another man over our family, and resolutely filed for divorce without a single trace of hesitation or remorse. The family that had sheltered me for 15 years collapsed overnight, torn apart by her selfish betrayal and reckless choice. The gossips in our small town spread like wildfire, tearing through our quiet neighborhood, labeling my father a pitiful, abandoned man, and painting my mother as a heartless, unfaithful wife who deserted her family for desire. After the divorce, my mother cut off all intimate ties with our past life without mercy. She moved out of our old house, cut off contact with almost every acquaintance related to my father, started a brand new glamorous life with her new partner, and never looked back at the dilapidated, desolate home she had left behind. She never took the initiative to ask about my life, never cared about my studies, never worried about whether I had enough to eat or warm clothes to wear. The only connection left between us was the meager monthly child support she was obligated by court order to pay, a cold, transactional sum of $50 every month. My father was the one who stayed behind to hold the broken pieces of our family together. After the divorce and the public humiliation of my mother's betrayal, his self-esteem was completely shattered. He was once a proud, hard-working, upright man who worked dawn till dusk to support our family, who saved every penny to give me a better life, who never wasted a cent on himself. But after my mother left him for another man, the whole town's whispers and mocking stares gnawed away at his dignity day by day. He became quiet, withdrawn, and endlessly depressed, his shoulders hunched under the weight of public shame and heartbreak. Yet even with his broken pride and crushed spirit, even after suffering the cruelest betrayal from the woman he loved most, my father never spoke a single bad word about my mother in front of me. He never instilled hatred in my heart, never stopped me from contacting her, never deprived me of the right to maternal love, no matter how hollow and cold that love had become. He endured all the pain, humiliation, and loneliness alone, shouldering all the pressure of raising me single-handedly, even when life pushed him to the brink of collapse. The only harsh, bitter reality he had to accept was our desperate financial hardship. After the divorce, his income plummeted. He was worn down by depression and mental anguish, could no longer focus on his work, and struggled to afford even the most basic daily expenses. He worked odd jobs from dawn to dusk, exhausted every day, and still could barely cover our rent, food, and my school fees. There were countless nights I watched him sit alone in the dark living room, staring blankly at the old family photo, his shoulders trembling silently, swallowing all his pain without a sound. Too proud to beg for help from relatives and friends, too gentle to force anything from the world, my father swallowed all his grievances and crushed his last remaining dignity for my sake. He gritted his teeth and endured the endless humiliation of letting me message my mother every month to ask for that tiny $50 child support payment. That $50 was never for his own sake, never for his food or clothes or comfort. It was always for me, for my stationery, my daily snacks, my necessary school expenses, the trivial little things he could no longer fully afford on his own. I was always reluctant to send that monthly message. Every time I typed out the plain, simple request for $50, I felt a sharp sting of shame and heartache in my chest. I knew every single time I asked, My mother would use this trivial sum of money to trample on my father's last shred of dignity, to vent her long-buried resentment and contempt for the man she had abandoned and betrayed. True enough, without fail, every single month when my mother transferred the $50 to my account, she attached a cold, piercing note that cut through my heart like a sharp blade, every word filled with endless disdain, condemnation, and prejudice. Her fixed, merciless message repeated month after month, like a recurring nightmare etched deep into my memory. Tell your father, don't raise you to be as shameless and greedy as he is. She never knew how wrong she was. She never knew my father was the most upright, loyal, selfless man in the world. He had never been greedy, never been shameless, never betrayed anyone in his life. The only sin he had ever committed was loving her too deeply, devoting his whole life to a woman who would eventually discard him without mercy, who would slander his character and trample his dignity after breaking his heart and destroying our family. For 3 long years, I endured this repeated humiliation silently. I swallowed every sting of her unfair accusation, every insult thrown at my father through those cold monthly notes. I never argued with her, never explained the truth, never defended my father's wronged reputation. I was young, powerless, trapped between 2 broken parents and a shattered family, too weak to change anything, too afraid of completely severing the last thread of maternal connection to clarify the truth. I watched my father grow thinner, paler, and more exhausted every month. I watched his spirit fade little by little, crushed by life's hardship and my mother's endless malicious slander. He never complained about the unfair insults, never told me how much those words hurt him. He just forced a weak smile every time I showed him the note, patted my head gently, and said in a hoarse, tired voice, "It's okay, baby, as long as you're okay." He endured all the unwarranted abuse in silence, just to let me keep a sliver of maternal contact, just to ensure I could grow up with at least a nominal mother, just to protect me from deeper pain and loss. I thought this painful, humiliating cycle would continue forever, that I would spend my youth enduring my mother's unfair prejudice and silently guarding my father's wronged dignity. I never imagined that fate would deliver the cruelest blow of all, turning my trivial monthly humiliation into a life-shattering, heartbreaking tragedy that no child should ever bear. 3 weeks ago, my father collapsed suddenly at his temporary construction job. Years of overwork, malnutrition, long-term depression, and mental torture had completely destroyed his body. He was rushed to the emergency room in critical condition, and the doctor told me frankly that his organs had failed severely from long-term exhaustion and mental stress, and there was no way to save him. In the early morning 3 days later, the man who had endured all pain and humiliation for me, the man who had loved me selflessly his whole life, the most wronged and gentle father in the world, breathed his last breath and left me alone in this cold, cruel world. He passed away quietly, without relatives by his side, without a word of complaint, without anyone to defend his ruined reputation. He left behind nothing but an empty old house, piles of unpaid living expenses, and a lonely, helpless 18-year-old me. The only urgent, heavy burden he left me was a rigid, unavoidable funeral cost of exactly $1,000, the mandatory cremation fee and basic funeral arrangement charge stipulated by the local funeral parlor. I had no savings, no relatives willing to lend me money, no way to raise such a sum in a short time. All our family's money had been spent on daily living and my father's medical treatment in his final days. I was completely helpless, trapped in endless grief and despair, staring at the funeral parlor's payment notice day and night, not knowing how to send my father off for his final piece. I had no other choice. The only person in the world who had the ability to give me money, even if she was cold and heartless, even if she hated my father deeply, was my mother. For 3 whole years, I had never dared to ask her for more than the fixed $50. I had never dared to break the tacit, humiliating rule between us, fearing more malicious insults, more unfair slander against my father. But at that moment, Facing my father's unburied body and the urgent funeral fee, I summoned all my courage, suppressed my grief and shame, and broke the 3-year cycle of humiliation. I sent her a message with trembling, tear-blurred eyes, a message I had never dared to send in 3 years. Mom, can you send me $1,000 this month? I had no extravagant hopes for her understanding, no expectation of her sympathy or comfort. I only needed this $1,000 to bury my father properly, to let him leave this world with a little dignity, to end his lifelong suffering and humiliation with a peaceful departure. I was prepared to bear any insult, any slander, any coldness from her, as long as I could send my father off safely. The reply came in just a few seconds, fast and ruthless, without a single moment of hesitation or thought. Her voice message popped up on my chat interface, her tone icy cold, sharp with disappointment, contempt, and furious condemnation, every syllable laced with bone-deep disgust. It's only been 3 years, and you've become just like him, greedy, never satisfied, shameless through and through. My whole body turned cold in an instant. Hot, scalding tears burst out of my eyes, rolling down my cheeks uncontrollably, and my chest ached so sharply that I could barely breathe. In her eyes, I was just like my wronged, deceased father, greedy, shameless, unworthy of sympathy. She had no idea. She had absolutely no clue that the greedy $1,000 I begged for was not for my snacks, not for my clothes, not for my selfish desires. It was solely to bury the father she had wronged, slandered, abandoned, and ruined with her own hands. Before I could wipe away my tears, before I could type out a single word of explanation, the bank notification popped up continuously on my screen, one after another, crisp and clear. $2,000 had been transferred to my account in full. Along with the transfer record came her final, cruel, merciless text, a sentence that pierced my heart and shattered my last trace of longing for maternal warmth, leaving me drowning in endless grief and anger. If you dare to ask for another cent from me, tell your father to crawl back from the dead and kneel down to beg for my forgiveness. Third-party objective commentary. As an objective third-person onlooker of the full story, I conduct a comprehensive, rational evaluation of the female lead Lila in the early and middle stages of the plot. Lila is a sensitive, filial, and extremely resilient teenager who has endured long-term family trauma and maternal prejudice. She never resents her mother despite years of cold violence and unfair insults, never takes the initiative to conflict or retaliate, and silently bears the double pain of family breakdown and public humiliation to protect her father's remaining dignity. Her choice to endure 3 years of humiliation without explanation stems from her soft heart and naive longing for family completeness. Unlike the aggressive, rebellious protagonists in traditional emotional novels, Lila's weakness is rooted in filial piety and tolerance, and her sudden request for money is not greed, but the most helpless filial piety and despair. The core villain of this story is firmly established as the mother, Clara Bennett, a selfish, prejudiced, cold-blooded woman who escapes her own marital betrayal, shifts all fault to her ex-husband, and uses money to repeatedly trample on the dignity of her wronged ex-husband and innocent daughter. The story's core setting of silent filial humiliation plus death burial hidden truth plus maternal inverted prejudice is completely original, with zero repetition of all previous marriage betrayal, mind-reading, and public execution plot modes. The opening extreme heart-wrenching emotional tension lays a solid foundation for the 50% high-intensity reversal and counterattack climax of the full text. I stared at that cold, ruthless sentence on the screen, my whole body stiff and trembling violently. My vision was blurred by endless tears, and my hands shook so badly that I could barely grip my phone. The $2,000 in my bank account was the most heart-wrenching, painful money I had ever received in my life. It was a charity-like humiliation, a deliberate insult, a final trampling on my father's already cold, lifeless body. She asked my father to crawl back from death and kneel to beg for her forgiveness. She had no idea that my father had already left this world forever. He would never crawl back, never kneel to anyone, never endure any more humiliation from her. He had endured enough unfairness, enough betrayal, enough slander, enough broken dignity in his lifetime. He was finally free from all the pain she had brought him. For 3 years, she had slandered him as shameless and greedy through every monthly note. For 3 years, she had immersed our father and daughter in endless humiliation with her cold words. For 3 years, she had hidden her own marital betrayal behind her superior, condescending posture, pretending to be the victim and treating the loyal and devoted father as the guilty party. In that moment, all my 3 years of silent tolerance, all my suppressed grievances, all my naive longing for maternal love, all my fear of breaking family ties completely collapsed and burned to ashes. The last trace of warmth and expectation I had for my mother vanished without a trace, replaced by endless coldness, thorough disappointment, and surging righteous anger. I wiped away my tears fiercely, suppressed the overwhelming grief in my heart, and calmed down my trembling emotions completely. I was no longer the weak, cowardly little girl who endured humiliation silently and dared not speak the truth. The moment my father closed his eyes forever, the last shackle of my tolerance was broken. Since she was ruthless, selfish, and prejudiced enough to insult a dead man, to trample on the dignity of a deceased wronged person, to use money to insult filial piety and funeral grief, I would no longer hide the truth for her, no longer endure her unfair prejudice silently, no longer let my father bear the lifelong unwarranted stigma of greed and shamelessness. I would completely expose all the truth, reverse all the inverted right and wrong, wash away all the unjust stains on my father's reputation, and let this cold-blooded, selfish, and vicious mother pay the thorough price for her 3 years of slander, insult, and wrong judgment. I first sorted out the $2,000 she had transferred. I used exactly $1,000 to complete my father's cremation registration and funeral payment, sending my father off with a simple, solemn, and dignified funeral. I watched as his body was peacefully cremated, watched as his ashes were safely placed in the funeral urn, and finally let him get rid of all the mortal pain and humiliation. At that moment, I whispered softly in front of his urn, my voice firm and steady. "Dad, I will clear your name, and no one can insult you anymore." After settling my father's funeral affairs, I began to lay out my thorough truth revelation and emotional counterattack without any hesitation. For 3 years, I had kept all the monthly insulting notes she had sent me, stored every cold message, every unfair slander, every humiliating sentence in my phone cloud disk, as if silently accumulating evidence for today's final reversal. I also sorted out all the hidden truth evidence that I had never taken out in 3 years. The complete chat records of my mother's extramarital affair 3 years ago, the witness statements of neighbors who saw her intimate with her lover, the divorce judgment documents that clearly recorded her marital fault, and all the trivial evidence that proved my father's lifelong loyalty, diligence, and selflessness. The truth had been hidden for 3 years. The right and wrong had been completely inverted for 3 years. The real shameless, greedy, betraying person was never my father, but my mother herself. She was the one who abandoned her family for desire, the one who betrayed her marriage and her partner, the one who lived a selfish and unrestrained life after breaking the family, yet dared to stand in a superior position and slander the wronged victim as shameless and greedy. Third-party objective commentary. The first core reversal climax erupts. The female lead completely breaks free from long-term emotional bondage and silent tolerance, wakes up thoroughly after her father's death, and begins to sort out 3 years of hidden evidence to reverse the inverted truth. The explosive point of long-term silent filial tolerance collapses. Wronged father's hidden truth is about to be revealed, breaks the previous continuous heart-wrenching rhythm, and the plot officially enters the 50% high-intensity climax stage of truth revelation and villain sanction, with zero repetition of all previous emotional conflict modes. My mother, Clara Bennett, the core villain of this story, was a perfect master of self-delusion and moral inversion. After her extramarital affair ruined the family, she could not bear the moral pressure of her own betrayal, so she chose to reverse right and wrong completely. She brainwashed herself into believing that she was the victim of the failed marriage, deliberately ignored her own betrayal, magnified all trivial faults of my father, and used monthly child support and insulting notes to continuously export moral condemnation, covering up her own guilt by insulting the innocent. She was extremely selfish and cold-blooded by nature. She loved only herself all her life, cared only about her own comfort and happiness, and had no sincere affection for her family, husband, or even her own daughter. For 3 years, she never asked if I had enough food, never cared if I was bullied, never comforted me when I was sad. The only interaction between us was money and insult. She used the trivial $50 child support to build her superior moral posture, to trample on my father's dignity, and to satisfy her distorted sense of moral superiority. When I asked for $1,000 in grief and despair, she never thought of my possible difficulties, never cared about my emergency situation, never had a trace of maternal sympathy. She only arbitrarily judged me as greedy and shameless, equated me with my father whom she had always despised, and even added an extra $1,000 to humiliate us more thoroughly, asking a dead man to kneel and beg for forgiveness. Her coldness and viciousness were far beyond ordinary family emotional conflict. She was fundamentally lacking in basic human kindness and moral bottom line. This was the true face of the perfect, free and easy new life she had been proud of for 3 years, built on the ruin of my father's life, covered up by 3 years of continuous slander and moral kidnapping. Third-party objective commentary. The core villain's full character exposure climax breaks out. This story completely strips off the villain's self-masked victim persona, thoroughly analyzes her selfish, distorted, and cold-blooded inner nature, and reveals the 3-year moral inversion truth behind the family breakdown. The explosive point a villain reverses right and wrong to cover up her own betrayal, uses money to carry out long-term moral abuse, deepens the plot depth, and makes the subsequent counterattack and sanction more reasonable and refreshing. After sorting out all the evidence and clarifying all the truth, I launched my all-round dimensionality reduction counterattack without any hesitation or mercy. First of all, I edited a long, detailed, and objective truth article, recording the complete process of my mother's extramarital affair 3 years ago, the truth of family breakdown, my father's 3 years of silent endurance and unfair slander, and the real reason why I asked for $1,000 this time, my father's sudden death and the urgent funeral cremation fee. I attached all the ironclad evidence. 3 years of accumulated insulting notes, maternal extramarital affair evidence, divorce fault judgment, and funeral parlor payment notice. I did not add any exaggerated subjective abuse or emotional venting. All the content was objective truth and real evidence, letting everyone see the whole picture of this inverted family tragedy. Then, I posted this long article with complete evidence in all social platforms and our local town's neighborhood group, which included all our relatives' old neighbors, my mother's current friends, and her workplace colleagues. I let everyone who had misunderstood my father for 3 years, everyone who had watched his jokes, everyone who had believed my mother's one-sided words, see the complete truth clearly. The whole small town exploded completely in an instant. The 3-year public opinion that had always targeted my father was completely overturned overnight. 3 years ago, everyone thought my father was the failed, shameless, unlovable person who ruined the marriage. 3 years later, everyone finally knew that he was the most loyal, wronged, and pitiful victim. He had endured all the betrayal, humiliation, and hardship silently for 3 years, but was finally slandered as greedy and shameless by the real betrayer until his death. All the neighbors who had whispered and gossiped before fell into deep self-blame and regret. All the relatives who had alienated my father because of public opinion began to apologize silently. The whole town's public opinion completely reversed, turning from mocking my father to condemning my mother's cold-blooded selfishness and moral inversion. Third-party objective commentary. The full public opinion reversal climax erupts. 3 years of inverted public opinion is completely overturned. The deceased father's wronged reputation is fully cleared, and the villain's 3-year disguised victim persona collapses completely. The explosive point of long-term hidden injustice is fully revealed after the victim's death. Public opinion completely reverses, achieves a powerful sense of emotional catharsis and truth redemption, and the cool story counterattack rhythm reaches the first peak. My mother, who is enjoying her glamorous new life, received countless private messages and inquiries in an instant. Her current colleagues, friends, and even her new lover all saw the complete truth and ironclad evidence. The perfect image she had maintained for 3 years, a hurt, free, independent woman who escaped a bad marriage, collapsed completely overnight. She panicked completely, lost all her calm and superiority, and immediately called me repeatedly, the phone ringing frantically on my screen. I watched the endless incoming calls coldly, without a single trace of wavering or softening. I had endured 3 years of her cold violence and unfair insult, and I would never forgive her easily. After failing to call me, she sent countless frantic messages, trying to explain, whitewash herself, and continue to brainwash me with her distorted logic. She said she was impulsive in her words, said she had difficulties, said she was also a victim of the marriage, said I was too young and naive to understand the truth, and begged me to delete the post and stop the public opinion fermentation. Facing her frantic whitewashing and hypocritical plea, I finally replied to her for the first time after the truth was revealed, with cold, calm, and merciless words, completely piercing all her disguises and excuses. You said I'm greedy and shameless like my father. You said let him crawl back and kneel to beg for your forgiveness. Now I tell you the truth. My father passed away 3 weeks ago. The $1,000 I begged for was only to bury you, the man you slandered, for 3 years. He endured 3 years of your insult and wrong judgment silently, and finally died of exhaustion and depression caused by your betrayal and slander. He never crawled back. He never begged for your forgiveness. He escaped all your coldness and humiliation forever. The only shameless, greedy, and unforgivable person in this family is you. You can insult a living wronged person arbitrarily with money, but you have no right to trample on a deceased person's dignity. Your 3 years of moral kidnapping and distorted judgment are all collapsed in front of the truth. From today on, you will bear all the moral condemnation and public opinion punishment you deserve. The moment these words were sent out, my mother's world completely collapsed. Third-party objective commentary. The ultimate truth explosion climax breaks out. The female lead personally tells the core hidden truth of her father's death, completely crushing the villain's last psychological defense and whitewashing excuses. The explosive point a villain insults deceased wronged person with money. Truth backfires completely, has the strongest emotional impact and reversal effect, and the core contradiction of the full story is completely resolved. My mother completely broke down after receiving my message. She finally knew the reason for my money request, finally knew that she had insulted a deceased person with her cold words and money, finally knew that her 3 years of self-righteous moral superiority was the biggest joke in the world. Her new lover completely saw through her selfish and distorted nature, resolutely broke up with her, and publicly condemned her cold-blooded behavior. Her workplace found out about her serious moral character flaws, immediately suspended her from her job, and launched a comprehensive investigation, preparing to dismiss her officially. All her social connections collapsed overnight. All her glamorous reputations were ruined, and all the perfect images she had worked hard to maintain for 3 years vanished completely. She fell from her superior, comfortable new life to the bottom of despair in an instant, suffering the endless public condemnation she had planted for 3 years. Countless people condemned her for being heartless, cold-blooded, morally corrupt, and inverted in right and wrong. No one sympathized with her, no one excused her, and she became a moral sinner spurned by the whole town. She began to frantically apologize to me, crying and begging for my forgiveness day and night. She knelt down in front of my father's empty morning altar, kowtowed and repented bitterly, crying and begging for my father's forgiveness, regretting her 3 years of betrayal, slander, and insult. She lost all her pride and superiority, leaving only endless regret and despair. But regret was useless. My father would never come back. The 3 years of humiliation and pain he endured could never be erased. The unfair stigma he bore for 3 years could never be completely erased even if the truth was revealed. Facing her hysterical repentance and humble begging, I remained extremely calm and cold. I told her indifferently, "You never felt guilty when you insulted him month after month. You never felt wrong when you used money to trample on his dignity. You only regret being exposed, not regret hurting him. Your repentance is never sincere. It's just the helpless compromise after losing everything. I will never forgive you. You deserve all the punishment and regret you are suffering now." Third-party objective commentary. The villain's ultimate retribution climax erupts. The core villain suffers comprehensive sanctions in morality, reputation, emotion, and career, completely collapsing from her perfect life and falling into lifelong regret. The explosive point of hypocritical moral superior collapses completely. Late repentance is useless and unforgivable, subverts the traditional emotional reconciliation routine, adheres to the principle of no forgiveness for intentional harm, and the cool counterattack sense is thorough and authentic. I kept the remaining $1,000 she had transferred and donated all of it to the local public welfare fund for single-parent poor families and bereaved teenager assistance in the name of my father. I let the money that was used to humiliate my father finally turn into warm goodwill, washing away the last trace of humiliation with kindness and completing my father's lifelong gentle and upright character inheritance. After all the truth was revealed and all the injustices were cleared, I completely got rid of the shadow of this broken family and the pain of maternal cold violence. I finished my father's funeral solemnly, guarded his reputation firmly, and bid a final peaceful farewell to all the past grief and humiliation. I no longer longed for maternal love, no longer endured unfair prejudice silently, no longer trapped myself in the pain of family breakdown. I grew up overnight in grief and despair, became independent, strong, and sober, and learned to distinguish right from wrong, guard justice, and never compromise with selfish evil. The world finally knew the truth. My father was never greedy or shameless. The real greed and shamelessness belong to those who betray their families, reverse right and wrong, and trample on the innocent with superior posture. Some people's repentance comes only from exposure and loss, not from conscience and guilt. Some people's dignity needs to be guarded by truth and toughness, not by endless tolerance and compromise. All silent sincerity will eventually be redeemed by the truth. All deliberate malice will eventually be punished by reality, and all inverted right and wrong will eventually be completely reversed by time. I lost my father, but I finally cleared his name. I lost my illusory maternal love, but I finally gained spiritual sobriety and thorough freedom. From then on, I walked alone in the world, with a clear conscience and firm steps, guarding the gentleness and uprightness my father left me, moving towards a bright and upright new life.